Vishnur Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. The Guru is not just a man. The Guru is the infinite taking that role to help you. God is the real Guru. That's why the Guru is Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Shiva. And Guru is also you, because you know we have lessons to learn also from one another. The more we understand that, the more we develop humility and openness. And openness is a very important thing. I think one of the most important things that I've learned on the path, because I've noticed that some of my fellow disciples became closed. They think, well, if he didn't say it, it isn't so. Well, he couldn't say everything there is to be said. I think that what he gave us above all was the ability to be open to what a child would say, to what a flower can teach you, what all sorts of things. The Divine Mother talks through everything, so that the noise of the wind in the trees is a part of the divine message. To be open to the Guru, in the right sense, is not to be closed to everything else, but to be open to the wisdom that you hear from everything else. Certainly you don't want to be, in your openness to the Guru, equally open to the stupidities of man. Of those there are plenty. But be ready to hear the wisdom, because the Guru is the infinite, expressed in that little form in order to bring you back to infinity itself. I would like to read to you today from Conversations with Yogananda. In God, the Master said, everything goes on in the present tense. It is like a movie which can be turned backwards or forwards. The action on the screen may cover centuries, but all the while up in the projection booth, it happens now. The secret of life is to learn to live life fully aware of present bliss. When you can learn to be happy in the present, you have God. I remarked, very few live in the present. Isn't that true, sir? That's true, he replied. Most people live in the past with nostalgia or regrets, or in the future with hopes and fears born of desire. We need to learn to live in that present tense, but we're always looking, as he said, to the past, thinking of what we did wrong, mulling it over, thinking I should have done it better, I wish I hadn't done it, I wish I had met so-and-so, all sorts of regrets for the past. Or in the future, when I get that money, then I'll be able to build that beautiful mansion I've always dreamed of, or when I meet this person, or do that thing, or when I finally strike it successful in Hollywood, whatever it might be. But you can only find truth if you can get rid of that sense of time. One of the most fascinating things that my Guru said was in his poem Samadhi, where he described, he said, all thoughts of all men, past, present, to come. All men, not just on this planet, but on all planets. That is the divine consciousness. That is what we must prepare our minds to finally achieve. We have to, in getting rid of the ego, it isn't just jumping into another little form. Suddenly, when you get rid of this one limitation of ego, you discover you are in all egos. I do urge you, if you have not read Autobiography of a Yogi, read it. And the most fascinating chapter of all is that one, my experience in cosmic consciousness, where his Guru touches him on the chest, and all of a sudden his consciousness begins to spray outward, stretch, extend outward to all the universe. This is what Samadhi means. It doesn't mean just living in a little bit of super consciousness. It means being everywhere. You are that. That's a scary state for the ego. First of all, the ego is the soul identified with the body and attached to the body. And so the ego says, well, wait a minute, let me keep my body. And so it is that when you go into meditation and your breath stops, the first thought is, oh, I'm not breathing. Sri Yukteswar used to put it this way. He said that the bird, if it's been living in a cage for 20 years and you open the door of the cage, the bird huddles at the back. It's afraid to come out. And only after a little practice, it may finally venture out and then rush back fearfully into its cage. All it's ever known is its cage. But if bit by bit it tries more and more to come out, then finally it begins to flap its wings and it discovers it can fly, and that its reality is flying in the sky and not being cooped up in that cage. Well, the cage is your body and the bird is your soul. And when you meditate and you reach this point of breathlessness, the first thought is, oh my God, I'm not breathing, I may die. And that very thought that, oh, I'm not breathing, it's enough to bring you back into this body. That thought of I, it's the I, the soul, attached to the body, identified with the body. And as long as you're identified with the ego, you think, oh, let me not leave this for a greater reality. It's too horrible to contemplate. That's why my guru, in that same chapter that I just mentioned to you, his guru said to him that you can't achieve this state by mere intellectual willingness. Only by gradual purification through devotional bhakti can you attain that. Where gradually, and it has to be through the guru also. One line in that poem is, by deeper, longer, thirsty guru-given meditation comes the celestial samadhi. You see, when you don't have that state, how can you think yourself into it? The very ego that you're trying to get out of is already infected with that delusion. You think you are that ego. It's only one who is not the ego who can reach down and help you to understand something that you can't imagine that you are, but you really are. You are not the ego. You are not this little body. And so it takes devotional bhakti and the blessings of the guru, who gradually is able to wean you from this thought that you are acting. You're not really acting. It's not you who do anything. But living in the world where everybody's constantly affirming his ego, I know, somebody told me a joke just yesterday, in fact, and it was a good joke, and I gave it time to be appreciated by everybody. Then, naturally, one likes to sort of add his own jokes, and so I told another joke. I was surprised, but not very, when he said, yep, and he went back to his own joke. He couldn't appreciate the new one. He was too busy about his own. This is such typical, normal consciousness. Don't be excited when you see yourself slipping into error, because it's just the nature of the ego. The nature of the ego is to think itself separate from you and you and you and you. I'm me. I know my brother, when he was 3 years old, my mother said something like, I forget what. And he looked at her very earnestly. He said, not my's me, Wobbert. But he couldn't imagine somebody else having a my. My is what he had. It's so hard to break that simple thought that I am separate from you, that you are the same thing as I. You are I. When I hurt you, I hurt myself. When I help you, I help myself. The more you live with a true guru, the more you have devotional bhakti for God, because then in loving God, you begin to love Him in all His forms. Bhakti is a wonderful thing to have. Intellectual jnana is not enough. Some people have attained it that way, but it's a dry path. I personally, although I came to Him as an intellectual, I've developed devotion. It's so much sweeter. But by devotion, you begin to see that same self that is struggling in you, struggling for freedom, struggling for understanding, struggling to get out of delusion, you see that others are going through that same thing. They're the same as you. What you're going through, they're going through. And so you develop a compassion, because naturally as you try, you're going to go and you're going to grow and you're going to learn a few things. And you see people who have not yet learned those things, you don't sneer at them. You don't think of them as less than you. You think of them, yes, I went through that too. And so you try to help them. And so with devotional bhakti, there comes also this natural compassion for other people and a wish to be of service to them. When there is not that desire to serve other people. There's arrogance. And where there is arrogance, where can there be bhakti? How can there be devotion? When you serve other people, when you see God in all, then you begin to understand that God is you. The more you can really get rid of that thought that I am separate from others, I am separate from Him, what I do is just not important. You've got to get over that thought that what you do matters. It's really a wonderfully freeing thing. Oh my goodness, if I'd had that thought when I built Ananda, I've had so many people talk about the great things I've done. To me, it's nothing. Everybody has to do something. You might as well do this, and might as well be useful. But what does it matter? In the end, God does everything. You know, when I've written music, I found the only way to get it is to let Him do it through me. All I need to do is get a clear picture of what I want. And then I say, God, give me a melody that says that, and there it is. I remember one time, ridiculous, but somebody actually spoke about my writing and said I must have been Shakespeare in my last life because I write so well. And I didn't believe it for a second, but there was enough of that thought lingering in my ego so that when I sat down to write the next day, I thought, well, I mustn't disappoint my public. As long as that thought was there, I could not get a single sentence right. It was so silly and so funny. And I would sort of like shifting railway cars back and forth, boxcars in a railway yard, and not one of them. I had 50 different ways of putting that first sentence that I was trying to write, and it just couldn't convince me. Finally, I had a good laugh at my own expense and realized what a fool I was being and how silly. And I said, God, you take it over. You take over. You tell me what to write. I'm just trying to write on this subject. You tell me how to do it. Instantly the thought came. Instantly I knew what I should do. And it was right. It's not as if I was just kidding myself and that was wrong too. I've read so many novels where people think they're deluding themselves if they think God tells them to do something. Well, maybe they are, but they don't have to be. If you're sincere, God can tell you what to do. God can show you what to do. And so it is that we need to get over this thought that we are separate from anything in the universe. And the more we can really feel that He does it through us, yes, we have to exert our egos. We've got to try our best. But we have to understand that it's with His power, with His inspiration, with His understanding, even with His strength, that we are doing this. You know, I had a very interesting experience. I mentioned the word strength. When I was building the first building at our Ananda Sangha, first community, and I had to do a lot of carpentry work, and I'm not a carpenter. In fact, I'm a lousy carpenter. But anyway, I tried my best until I got other people into the act. And I remember I had a staple gun, and I was trying to staple plastic to a one-by-one strut of wood. It was a very stiff staple gun, and I have small hands, so that I could only get the edge of 2 fingers around it to work. There was a woman working with me in the group there who needed 2 hands, and even with 2 hands she couldn't make it work. So it was a stiff staple gun. Well, I was very anxious to get this work done. And so I worked and got more and more tired until after about the 500th time, I just could not make my hand squeeze one more time. I thought, well, but if I don't finish this job now, the storms of winter will come and destroy everything. I've got to finish this job. So with all my willpower, but I asked God to show me, to give me that strength. I said, God, we've got to do this. With a great deal of effort, I squeezed my hand one more time, then one more time. Do you know, about the 10th time, suddenly it became easier. By the 20th, it was perfectly easy. I went on another 500 times and was able to do the job for the rest of the day. Well, that's a very important point. You've heard of second wind that athletes get. It's something our Guru taught us too. He used to say that the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. And he taught us energization exercises. I would strongly recommend that you learn these because they give you tremendous energy. But you have to understand where that energy comes from. It comes from the cosmos. It's not something just generated by your muscles and your ego. The more you try to draw on that divine energy, the more you find that there is really almost nothing that you can't do. You've got the strength of 10, as they used to say, of Galahad, because his heart was pure. But when your heart is pure, because you are doing it for God, and if you know the principle, because the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. But again, the more you do it, feeling that you are doing it as God's instrument, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. This power within you is the power of the infinite. Get rid of the thought of ego. Get rid of that simple little thought that I'm doing it. But don't then say, well, God, you do it all. That won't accomplish it for you. If, on the other hand, you can say that I will do my best, but you've got to do it with me. You've got to do it through me. You'll be amazed at what you can do. My guru had enormous power. He was not a very big man. About 5'6". Yes, he had a strong body. But nonetheless, I know one time he wanted to show people in a lecture in Symphony Hall in Chicago what these energization, what divine power can do for you. And he challenged 6 people to come up from the audience. Well, 6 burly Irish policemen on the Boston police force jumped up on the platform, and everybody thought, oh, he's bulling it this time. They were big strapping people over 6 feet. And so my guru put his back against the wall, and he had them push with their hands against his body, against his stomach. And he said, all right, are you ready? Yeah, like that. And he just, like this. They all fell back into the orchestra pit. His strength was incredible. But it all comes from God. Strength, inspiration, joy, power. Everything comes from God. It doesn't come from your ego. Your ego is just a little tiny manifestation of that infinite one. Turn to Him. Use that power that you've been given by Him. You'll see there is nothing that you cannot accomplish. Joy to you.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining